Hi, my name is Jack Bouroudjian. I am from Chicago, Illinois. I am the co-founder and chief economist of UCX Tech. I am also the co-founder and chairman of the Global Smart Commodity Group. I am a broker, a trader in the derivatives industry, and have been for the past 30 years. I've also had quite a few other experiences, everything from, starting as a runner all the way on through the board of directors, which I'll go through. But my experiences really started with what I had as a family life at a very early age. Now, my parents are immigrants from the old city of Jerusalem, from the Armenian Quarter. They are technically refugees, and that's how they came to the United States. My grandparents are the only survivors from the Armenian genocide. They ended up basically walking from what is now eastern Turkey all the way down to the Jerusalem area, and they survived. We estimate that we lost roughly 75 members of the family. But those experiences and the stories that were told to me by my grandparents and by my parents had a lot to do with how I was shaped and the moral fiber, I guess, by which you end up making certain decisions over the course of your life. From that basis, I ended up, of course, going into university here in Chicago, learned much about the markets, but more importantly, was exposed to other things at that university level. It was a Catholic Jesuit-run university, and we were absolutely had to take theology and philosophy. Many of those core curriculum classes ended up shaping a lot of what I became after I left school. And more importantly, it shaped the way I thought about decision making, especially when you're thinking about analytic decision making over the course of the next 30 to 50 years of my life. And it still does. But going back to it, I ended up getting onto the floor of the exchange at an early age. I started working right out of university on the floor. Started as what they would call a runner, where you would take orders physically from the desk into the pit, where a broker would screen them into the open outcry session. And then, of course, you would take that paper back where it would be reported to the customer. From there, I became a broker. I traded in the pit for quite a while. I went outside of the pit and got on the sell side of the business and started to handle customers. I became acquainted with a couple of very, very important gentlemen in my life. One who's passed, whose name is Dr. Bing Sung, who ran the Harvard Endowment Fund. Bing took me on as his personal assistant, and I learned quite a bit from Bing. In fact, a few years later, I ended up writing a book that Wiley published called Secrets of the Trading Pros, and in that book, I talk about all the Bingisms, as I call them, things that I learned from Bing during the course of those years that I spent with him on the phone. But what I did was I ended up going from that point all the way on through, starting operations for Nikko Securities in Chicago in the equity department. Then I ended up starting operations for Credit Agricole in the equities here in Chicago. Then ended up being asked by Commerzbank out of Frankfurt to come and run their operation here in Chicago, which I did. They ended up appointing me president of Commerzbank. During that time, I was also on the board of directors of CME Group. I was a three-time elected board member, during which time we ended up demutualizing the exchange and launched quite a few products, which really gave me a feel for product creation, something that is now working with me as we're creating brand new products for the Global Smart Commodity Group. All of that really gave me a basis for where I ended up going. You know, it's said that, you know, it takes an entire village, you know, to raise a child. Well, you know what? It took an entire city to raise this child. And the experiences that I got from all different walks of life and all different types of people really gave me an appreciation for what I am today, and more importantly, how I got here. You know, what I care about is, I guess, what everybody really cares about. You care about family, you care about country, you care about your religion if you're religious, you care about spirituality if you're spiritual. Those are the things that I care about, and they're part of my moral fiber, I guess. It's something that I've debated intellectually, having gone to a university that was taught by Jesuits. I had that theology ingrained into my brain. And I also had the idea to think analytically ingrained in my brain. So I questioned everything, which I think everybody has to do. To take things as dogma is very difficult. So a lot of the values I think that I've ended up having in my career and who I've become and what I really care about can probably go back to my family and my education, all of which has kind of given me the opportunities. Now, remember, going through all of that kind of set the stage for the experiences that you go through with life. There have been ups and downs in the career which have given me time to pause and actually wonder whether I'm doing the right thing. There have been decisions that I've made that I know are what I fought with on an ethical basis, whether it be putting people out of work, unfortunately, and knowing that it was just nothing more than a head count sent to me by Frankfurt, which was a very difficult thing to do because I didn't see people as a head count. I saw them as individuals. So all of that is really what I care about. And more importantly now, I think with what we're seeing in the world, it's important to start caring about things that matter. For example, I'm very excited about one of my new projects, which is this Global Smart Commodity Group, because we're starting to be a very conscious type of commodity exchange. We're looking at renewable, sustainable commodities, where we've got a governance board that is all-inclusive. We are the exchange for the future. Now, I say that because I would love to see other enterprises do exactly that. Start thinking of the future. You know, there's a wonderful, I'm a big hockey fan, and of course there's the greatest hockey player in the world, Wayne Gretzky, and one of the things that he would always say is, don't go to where the puck is, go to where it's going. And what we have to do is to start thinking morally about where that puck is going, not only financially. And that seems to be one of the dilemmas that we're dealing with right now, not only as a society, but as individuals, as capitalists, as those whose basis is really there to make money. And yeah, you know, one of the stories that I always tell is that my wonderful wife of 34 years is a registered nurse. And back when she was practicing on her med-surg floor, back about 25 years ago, there was a heart patient. Now, this heart patient ended up being a very tough old-time gangster that was on the floor of the exchange, and I knew about him, and people were afraid of him. And you know, everybody knew when he was leaving, and he was a big, heavy-set gentleman. Well, he came back to the floor about 200 pounds lighter after his open heart surgery. Gave me a little gift. He walked right up to me, and I barely recognized him, and started to cry, and said, "Your wife saved my life. Nobody came and visited me. Your wife held my hand and told me I would be fine." Now, I could make somebody $1 billion and never get that type of emotion. So when we start to think about what we really care about, it's got to be more than money. It's got to be something deeper, or else it doesn't matter. The pandemic has really affected everybody in a very unique and personal way. For me, it's a little different because I've got cousins and I've got a wife who are frontline workers. So they're the ones that are actually out there and they're watching people die, which is a very difficult thing to do. You know, when those of you that are around medical professionals understand that it's a torment that they live with. These are people that are trained. They take the Hippocratic oath to save lives, and they find it very difficult, and they take it very personally many times when people die. Well, you've had such a rash of death. You've had an overwhelming sense of grieving that has been coming from that community. So I feel that firsthand. I can sense it. I can feel it. I see the pain on their faces when they come home. I hear the tears on the phone. And it's one of those things that it will live with us forever. You know, there are a few things that happen within every generation that shape that generation. This is one of those things that we will be talking about in 30, 50 years as something that shaped our entire generation. And I'm not only talking about the millennials or the Generation Xers, I'm also talking about middle-aged, Armenian Americans, which have experienced unique emotions, things that we never thought we would experience with this entire pandemic. And more importantly, I think it's given us an appreciation for what we had. The ability to be able to go out to a restaurant and order a meal and not worry about getting sick. The ability to be able to board a plane, and be able to fly someplace and go see a relative and not worry about getting sick. Again, these are days that much like 9/11, you remember and hearken back to the earlier days when it was easy to get on an airplane. So the whole COVID-19 pandemic has really affected us in a very personal way. Now, from a business standpoint, it's been wonderful, and I hate to say it that way. UCX Tech builds out platforms for e-commerce. We enable businesses to do business in this environment. When they want to spin up infrastructure, if they need a managed service provider, all they have to do is go to the UCX marketplace and they can spin that up. That's a very unique proposition to have at a time where you have got most of the workforce working from home. Now, one of the things that we also see happening, though, of course, is the fact that most of these people that are home might end up staying at home for quite a while. And remember what's going to happen at that point. You're going to need infrastructure build out and more managed service providers and more services over the course of the next few years. If you're running an enterprise right now and you've got your servers on-prem, for example, you're a dinosaur. I hate to say it. Yeah, I've spoken to people, and one of the things that always has amazed me, and I think they're getting it now with this COVID-19 pandemic, is that in technology, people see things differently than they do in the capital markets. Now, we believe in diversification. We believe in making sure that all your eggs aren't in one basket. Well, it's taken technologists a long time to realize that what they have done, in essence, is put all their eggs in one basket. It could be an Amazon basket, it could be a Microsoft basket, but more importantly, the need to have a multi-cloud approach, especially when you are now completely dependent on cloud infrastructure for your productivity. It's amazing. Again, these are things that have happened, and don't take my word for it. Look at some of the market caps that we're seeing on these stocks. Zoom is a great example. When we look at Zoom today, its market cap, which has grown and doubled over the course of the last couple of months, equals all 4 major airlines here in the US. That in itself tells me the power and where the puck is going. Talking about my future in an environment that is very, very uncertain is a little difficult. Remember, what we're dealing with right now is a big question mark and a cloud that's hanging over everybody's head. Now, when I say that, what I really mean is the fact that, remember, we've come from a location where we were very safe, where we felt very good about what was happening. All right, and now where we are going has got a big cloud over it. Nobody knows where we're going. Are we going to see a resurgence of the pandemic in another year, in another 2 years? Are we ever going to find a virus? Look, there is an optimist in all of us that thinks that with the power of the human race at our disposal, that we'll be able to get past this. But what I hope will happen for the future is what's happening to all of us in many ways individually. That is a sense of appreciation for what we have, a sense of feeling blessed in many ways, for not being able to be one of those people that are on the respirators, unfortunately, and aren't making it off. This is a time where I think reflection is probably better suited than ever before. Many of us have made a lot of money in our lives and have been very successful. And I guess what you do at times like this is you reflect back on that success. You wonder if indeed you've done enough. Is there something more you can do? Are you going to leave a legacy, or is basically, is it nothing more than just a bank account that you're going to leave behind? These are the things that we need to ask ourselves as individuals, especially as we go forward. Now, there's a lot of pessimism out there, especially these days. People look at what's going on in politics, people look at the social disorder, and people will look, and more importantly, they'll be concerned about the future. Now look, there's every reason to be concerned about the future. But then again, being a product of the 60s and 70s, I remember as a child when it looked like society was coming apart at the seams. When Chicago was rioting in the 60s, when the world was exploding, when Kissinger and Nixon went into Cambodia, all of that is still fresh on my mind here in my late 50s. So all I can tell people is that the future is a lot brighter than people think it will be. And with the power of technology now and what we are seeing happen, technology is taking a new role in life. I used to say, when I was at the board level, that people didn't really understand technology, and a lot of board members don't. We would argue for 2 hours. We would argue ad nauseum over things that we understood that really didn't matter. But then when they came in and they told us that they needed to spend $200 on a disaster recovery site, we would all look at each other and say, I guess we need this, and we would spend that money. That role has changed. That board of director now has to know what's being spent on technology, because technology is where the future is. And more importantly, technology is where profitability will be and where all innovation will take place over the course of the next 50 to 100 years. I just hope I'm around to see most of it. We hear the term, everything has changed quite a bit. In fact, I've heard it in 1987, I heard it in 2001 after 9/11, I heard it, of course, after the big Great Recession in 2008, 2009. But this is a time where I believe everything really has changed. We're looking at a pandemic that was brought on by nature. It is a silent killer. It's not man-made. Too often we've been looking at destruction that has been man-made. We just experienced as a human race a century that had nothing but war and destruction and hundreds of millions of lives lost over things that really, in the final analysis, should not have happened. Now, one of the things that I hope that we have done is that we've learned from history. As a student of history, it's one of the things that I talk about quite a bit. And more importantly, what we want to do is understand that things are always going to change. There was a wonderful book written in the late 90s by Howard Strauss called The Fourth Turning, where they talk about the cyclicality of history and how about 80 to 100 years, which is the span of a human life, we start to see changes take place. And you're a product of that history. You're a product of what happens during those ages. And what they told us in that book, and I'd advise you to go out and read it, is that you usually end the period with a crisis. And that crisis usually lasts roughly 20 years. So, and it was very prophetic at the time. They talked about the crisis beginning in the mid-2000s, 2008, as it turned out to be the beginning of the crisis in my mind, and it's going to end in the 2020s. Now, this was something that was written in the late 90s. And the reason I bring that up is because for people to have a good sense of how things change and are constantly changing is very important. Knowing that change is inevitable, all right, and embracing change in whatever form it takes place is absolutely crucial to survival. And I guess it's being more the product of a generation of survivors that has led me to believe that. But if you don't end up evolving, then you end up dying. And that is really the question mark that's going to be left here after this entire pandemic. Will people evolve? Will they embrace change? Whether it be social change, whether it be environmental change. These are things that right now shouldn't be debated, yet they are still being debated. And all of those things, those questions that have been out there and very ambiguous to some people are now becoming very clear. And that clarity, hopefully, will add a lot to the debate that we are going to have over the course of this next 5-7 months. Because the debate that we're going to have is going to shape human beings and human nature, our thinking, our actions, and more importantly, our feelings and beliefs for the next generation. Thank you.